All right, everybody. First, we'll kick off this module with validation documentation and what your validation documentation should consist of. So we'll discuss different types of validation documents. We'll explain the importance of a validation master plan, or VMP. We'll list the key components of the validation protocol and preparation of final reports. And we'll describe documentation pitfalls, consequences, and solutions. So one thing to note is a successful validation program allows manufacturers to better understand sources of variation, how to detect the presence and degree of variation, the impact of variation on the process and product attributes, and how to control the variation in a manner commensurate with potential risk to process and product. So the validation program overall lets you understand um, your key attributes within your process, the ranges, how you're going to handle that, and it analyzes the risk to the process and product. So quality systems approach to pharmaceutical CGMP regulations, 2006 guidance for industry. It recommends an integrated team approach to process validation, includes expertise from a variety of disciplines, devise project plans, and full support from senior management. So all these are recommended for a successful process validation. Also, the quality systems approach to pharmaceutical CGMP regulations, 2006 guidance for industry, says the validation working party defines the process and defines and approves the entire effort, including all documentation generated. So it should be composed of the head of QA, head of engineering, validation manager, production manager, and specialist validation discipline. So essentially, if you're generating your validation document and you need approvals or reviews, you should at minimum have these key members of the different functional areas: QA, engineering, validation, production, and of course your specialist in validation, so that you have a robust document when you're done with it. So types of validation documents. A strong process validation program has numerous types of documents that are utilized. So you have your validation master plan, your validation plan, validation protocols and final reports, and then you go through your individual, like your DQ, which is your design qualification, then your IQ, OQ, PQ, which we've been discussing, installation qualification, operational qualification, the process qualification / your process validation. So your validation master plan is kind of like a high-level overview on how you're going or what you're going to validate within a particular building. So just a high-level overview on your plan and what's going to be validated and the different pieces of equipment / rooms / utilities. And then you go into your validation plan, which gives a more specific overview of the equipment. I'm going to perform an IQ, OQ, PQ on this equipment or on this particular utility, or I'm only going to perform an IQ here or an OQ here. So it goes into more detail, and then of course your protocols is your most detailed document because each protocol covers each piece of equipment or utility that you're going to validate. So types of validation documents. So a strong process validation program has numerous types of documents that are utilized. So you have technical reports, you have executive summaries or executive reports, and then you have qualification summary reports. So you're supporting regulatory submissions. So your validation documents have numerous types of documents that it uses, and it just makes your validation program more robust. So now we're going to the validation master plan. This is the validation flow chart. So like we said, you start with your validation master plan, then you go into your protocols, then you go into your preparation to actually execute. You analyze your data, and then out of that, you get your report. So this is kind of like a high-level overview on step-by-step process of validation. You also have your product life cycle. So this is kind of like how you start to you end. So you start with a concept, design, your user requirement or functional requirement specifications. constructed, either your FAT, which you said was a factory acceptance test, then your SAT, install it at site, commissioning, then your IQ, PQ, PV, manufacturing. After you go into manufacturing, any changes needs to be documented in change control, and then if your equipment needs to be taken out of service or no longer useful, it's decommissioned. So this is like a high-level overview or project lifecycle of validation. So going into the site validation master plan, it presents an overall picture to visiting auditors of how the company has integrated CGMPs into its daily activities. It's the primary tool for validation planning. It's not an FDA requirement, but it's one of the documents regulators may ask to review during on-site inspections. And it must define the validation activities and allot responsibilities for authoring, reviewing, approving, and executing validation documentation tasks. So like I was said earlier, validation master plan is like a high-level overview or your picture of how you want to incorporate validation or CGMPs into your manufacturing process. It says it's not an FDA requirement, but a regulator might want to review it. So it's in your best interest to have your site validation master plan because it will be one of the first things they ask during inspection. The GMP systems inventory contained within the site validation master plan should list everything on site that requires validation. So again, it's overall validation plan, and it lists all the everything that requires validation, such as your equipment, freezers, incubators, manufacturing processes, cleaning processes, CIP, analytical methods, your UV assays, computer systems, electronic batch records, utilities such as your Wi-Fi and facilities, such as all your clean rooms. So the validation master plan lists everything that's going to be validated within the facility. So the system inventory should capture the required level of validation for each system, such as whether it's going to be IQ, OQ, PQ, method validation, process validation, cleaning validation, or computer system validation. So you have your inventory, and you need to outline exactly what's going to be validated, whether it be IQ, OQ, PQ, or all three, or just one or two, whether it be method validation, process validation, cleaning validation, or a computer systems validation. So if you're doing your site validation master plan, and as we said, you need to list out each piece of equipment and what type of validation you're going to do. So this is an example of how you would do that and how you would list what's going to be covered or not. So if I'm looking at my filling machine, I'm being told in my validation master plan that they're going to do an IQ, OQ, PQ. I'm not doing a method validation, or process validation, or CV, but I will do a computer system validation. So this gives you a high-level overview where you define your equipment, your system, and what exactly or how it's going to be validated. So planning validation schedule. So you use task dependent instead of hard dates, i.e. lab method used in process must be validated before the PV is performed. Schedule specific time for pre-validation activity, so development of validation protocols, calibrations. Include time and resources for contingencies, such as resolving a non-conformance, and include company holidays, plant shutdowns, and PM activities. So within your validation master plan, they want to see a plan of your validation activities, and it needs to be organized. And you need to specify if I'm going to validate this piece of equipment, you kind of dictate how many days you think each piece of the validation, such as IQ. Okay, this is going to take 5 days, so you put 5 days. So you plan for it, a 5-day IQ validation. Then you go into your OQ. It could take you 10 days. You have to also build in contingencies, so not everything is always going to work out perfectly. So you want to plan for any pitfalls or mistakes that's going to happen. So you might build in 2 or 3 days extra just to account for any issues that might occur. Every company I've been with, especially working in the validation space, they've always had a validation schedule so that you can plan for labor, plan for how long the documents can be wrote out, and overall have an idea of where you're going to start and where you're going to end, and how much time or how long your validation plan. So this is very critical in your schedule.